Hey everyone, today we're going over all the cinematography from every cutscene in the game, as well as a few extras that I thought were noteworthy. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started. Starting with the destroyed Halo ring in the first image is a brilliant reminder right off the bat to returning players of their accomplishments in Halo CE. Whilst for the new players, it immediately sets the scale of some of the tech in the Halo universe with the planet in the background, giving us sort of scale. Same with the Covenant ship, obviously in the foreground for how big this rig really is. And I think the text saying when we are at the bottom right here is very important. Like, while we may not know how long these ages of reclamation, quote unquote, are, saying we're in the 9th implies a long history, which obviously the Covenant indeed has. The shot of the Banshees flying over the mist and the fog of High Charity continues to help give us this sense of scale, with this shot in particular helping us appreciate the true size of High Charity's interior. And then afterwards we finally focus on the core of the introduction, which is to introduce players to the Arbiter. Having him give his perspective on the events in CE, as well as being judged harshly for it, gives us what we need to understand the Arbiter as a character as far as his history and perspective is concerned heading into this game. Now we switch over to the Chief and an award ceremony which serves the role of hinting at the story arc upcoming in Halo 2's campaign for each other. Chief being the respected hero of humanity who stays stoic, whilst the Arbiter is a disgraced villain who must go through many trials to later walk alongside Chief, spoiler alert, as a hero. It also contrasts positively towards each other with the UNSC being very friendly towards each other and the hostility within the internal ranks of the Covenant, and contrasts those two very well. Eventually the festivities on the UNSC side are interrupted and we don't switch back to High Charity for the rest of this cutscene, as the cutscene now focuses on leading us into the first mission as Chief. Much like the end of the intro cutscene, this one serves as a vehicle to move the story along rather than give us any deeper insights into the universe or anything like that. In fact, this cutscene actually ultimately served as the replacement for a cut level in the campaign, which would have not only seen us driving in the ship that we destroy in this cutscene as the Chief, but we would have had the bomb that we use, the Space Pickle. It would have been attached to the Warthog all the way driving through all of the ship in an entire mission. And while I am of course sad that we got less content than the devs intended, as Joe Satan said himself here,
but the reason why we have the bomb...
I know what you're thinking.
Well, that looked fast. Well,
because the
Unfortunately for us
original
both,
plan was to have a level after this one
oh yeah,
called Covenant Ship.
Covenant ship.
And the Master Chief, much like he did in the announcement trailer for Halo 2, there was no bomb. He would just man up, pop the airlock, bam, land on the Covenant ship, tear it apart from the inside.
Right. But instead, you did probably one of the most amazingly ridiculous cutscenes in the history of games.
one question.
Well, I figure if you're gonna cut a level, this is the way to cut it. I won't.
By creating just as much work.
I love the slight little tease here as players during the build-up to release seem most excited to see Halo's take on Earth and its setting. So first we, focus on the ship, then we get a top-down view of the Pelicans before finally the camera pans up to reveal an epic skyline peeking above the clouds with Covenant ships and its beam all the way firing down to the surface, looming over some of the city. We also get a series of shots afterwards where the characters are here explaining themselves a bit, and the scale of the city as well as the UNSC forces is also expressed very well here before eventually a brand new and now iconic vehicle of the franchise, the Scarab, stomps in and takes down our Pelican. We don't get another cutscene until the end of Metropolis, but it also starts with showing us the Scarab causing havoc across the city. However, Johnson comes in to give the group some reinforcements and the encouragement that they can take down the Scarab, which is hinting to the player that that's the ultimate goal of this mission. Johnson being Johnson, he also gives us some classic Johnson quotes to lighten the mood even further. Our time on Earth concludes with this cutscene. Right away, Chief walking away from the Scarab he destroyed very confidently, followed by the massive Covenant ship over the city fleeing and immediately making a run for it. Johnson is of course very excited as he flies in, but we immediately cut to Miranda as the cutscene instantly switches from celebratory to tense. Miranda is hurrying Chief and Johnson back into the ship, and she is going full speed in pursuit of the fleeing ship as it makes a slip space jump right above the city. As always, the soundtrack only enhances the emotions of the cinematography that it's trying to give us to guide us towards emotionally even further as the string really builds up the suspense here. We start this cutscene in the first-person view of the Arbiter to sort of symbolize the transition from Chief's side of the story, ultimately pulling back towards a third-person view for the rest of the cutscene, as is typical with most Halo 2 cutscenes. This bit panning past the elite honor guards is setting up for later. Spoilers, but this won't be the only time that we get this angle of the honor guards as Arbiter is moving through here, and the composition of the guard is going to drastically change. And that here, even the brutes who are portrayed in this game is very new to the Covenant and all its traditions. They all kneel in unison and respect the orders of the prophets, even though they clearly don't like their decision. Clearly, Tartarus in particular is working extra hard to gain the maximum amount of favor that he can from the prophets. Given how rigid the Covenant caste system is, it's easy to see why the brutes dislike the elites above them, to say the least. And given the prophets wield just such a disproportionate amount of power, it's easy to understand why Tartarus will ultimately go down the path he does. This slow scrolling across the countless Arbiter's tombs alongside the prophets lecturing about the history of the Covenant really helps give players the weight of that history in a fantastic way. In just a few short minutes, we've seen so much information about the Covenant in these Arbiter cutscenes, and this weight of history in every aspect really enriches all of it, especially the reveal of the Arbiter set of armor. And then this camera turn here is super handy because it tells us where we are in the galaxy specifically. We're in this area of space along the ring in CE that was destroyed by the Chief. In fact, High Charity itself is right above the gas giant the original ring orbited. Here, Artas giving his rally speech to the group sort of sets some parallels between him and Johnson. Both are super powerful, wise, and sarcastic heroes who are incredibly close to each protagonist in the game that we play as. It also gives us even more differentiation between the species than we can say in gameplay personality-wise, with the grunts goofing around here while the elites are obviously very orderly and serious. And just like how we started the cutscene in the Arbiter's point of view, we zoom back into it as this cutscene ends, smoothly transitioning into the mission as far as gameplay is concerned itself. Arbiter displays his determination at several points here, first by banging on the shield door he knows won't break his smack, and then by immediately turning to the projection of the station and stating that his intention is to cut the cable despite the obvious danger that poses to himself. Now this sequence of events is very interesting. Us players already know at this point in the story that the Covenant and the Great Journey are lies, but the Arbiter does not. So seeing the heretic leader so eloquently tell the truth to the Arbiter gives us some hope he may start to see the Prophet's lies. But sadly, he attacks the Arbiter while he is speaking to 343 Guilty Spark and genuinely trying to hear him out. It's a tragic moment because not only does that result in the heretic's leader's inevitable death, but Arbiter sinks back into eating up the Prophet's narrative again. Oh, and Tartarus also just like Electrograb forces Guilty Spark with a hammer here, but he's been through worse, he'll be fine. We then flip back over to Chief's side as Miranda's ship is making it through the other side of the portal using the Covenant carrier as its sort of target to make it through. The camera turns to give us this beautiful shot of the Halo ring in orbit around the massive blue gas giant with the crew flying towards it slowly. And then the cutscene continues, alternating between showing us who's talking on board the ship and then giving us these beauty shots, so to speak, of the ring as they close in on it, up until they finally send the drop pods down at the surface of this new Halo ring. Anyone familiar with Halo 3 ODST can see, when watching this cutscene at least, where the inspiration for its fantastic intro comes from. Quite frankly, the drop pods are just an awesome meeting between a cool concept and epic design, in my opinion, in general. And then we get all sorts of varying camera angles of the pods as they break into the atmosphere and eventually land onto the surface. We can see it from the side, below, above, and even in third person from the perspective of some of the Covenant troops on the ground as this swarm of drop pods falls towards their position. Finally, this series of scene ends with the player getting back into action as the Chief obviously busting open the drop pod door and wielding the rocket launcher. At the end of Delta Halo, we get this brief cinematic where Cortana helps alert the Chief to the Prophet's plans as this hologram of him is literally singing it out loud. It switches back to Miranda with a holographic model of something that returning players are going to recognize by its shape, and it's nothing other than the index itself, which is needed to activate each Halo ring. And this scene ends with switching back and forth between the two groups as they formulate a plan to split the party, with Chief pursuing one of the Prophets, while Miranda and the rest of the crew go to the library to steal the index from the Covenant. The ominous advice in D&D of never split the party rings into mind. Spoilers for later. Near the end of the next mission, we get a brief cutscene here of the Chief walking onto the platform where the Prophet hides as a Covenant fleet teleports in above him before immediately switching back into gameplay for the rest of the level, letting you take him out. And then when the mission ends, Chief comes back outside and suddenly some of the ships are way close, and a lot too close for comfort, in fact. As you can see side by side comparing the two. Booking it as hard as he can, he just is a few feet from the giant laser beam being fired down as he leaps into the water, where from the depths below, the Gravemind slowly rises to drag the Chief further down into the water. We come back to the Arbiter's perspective in the Sanctum of the Hierarchs, where he ultimately reports on a successful mission and is going to be tasked with retrieving the sacred icon that the UNSC crew was just talking about earlier. We see the former elite honor guards walking away helmetless with their heads held down in shame while the brutes are walking in. We see the brutes actively confiscating their gear in front of the Arbiter, as well as two brutes fighting each other over a single helmet. With no word said, we can already tell that there was quite literally a radical changing of the guard, and both the audience as well as the Arbiter himself as a character can see this overthrow with our own eyes in action. Here the Arbiter takes a long look at the elites debating with the Hierarchs in the inner chamber, that they're at least the ones that were given an audience, giving us a clue that he, without verbally communicating it, has had his first seed of doubt planted in the Prophets. There will be several more as we move along in this story. As the conversation moves along between showing off what they think they've learned from Guilty Spark, aka the Oracle, and having nothing other than a literal Halo ring installation in the backdrop of this entire conversation, it's clear from the Prophet's perspective, or at least, how they are trying to appeal to the Arbiter here, by providing things that they believe he would consider evidence, so to speak, to keep them in line, or at least any follower of their faith. You know, this whole notion of, yeah, you might not like the decisions we've made against you and your people, but hey, look, they were necessary because now we're all closer to salvation now, you know, all that sort of BS. Some of that we see in the real world, unfortunately. And then here's a brief interaction with the Arbiter and his crew, which is just Tartarus and his brutes this time instead of the elites that the Arbiter has consistently showed more camaraderie with. And with the end of this cutscene giving us a preview of some of the new Sentinel units that you're going to be fighting in this mission as it chases off Tartarus and his Phantom. As Quarantine Zone wraps up, we get a good shot of elites gather to hear another motivating speech by Artos, with the camera focusing on him for the majority of the brief cutscene and only focusing on the Arbiter at the end as we transition into gameplay. While I don't have anything interesting to point out visually when it comes to this cutscene of the Arbiter getting on the gondola to pursue the sacred icon as Artos stays behind, audio-wise, I do find it extra heartwarming and poetic that the music playing here with the Arbiter has to leave Artos behind is somewhat similar to the music playing much later in the campaign when, spoiler alert, Chief has to leave Cortana.
structure in the center of the city. It's a Forerunner ship. And Truth is heading straight for it. If he leads the Covenant fleet to Earth, they won't stand a chance. You have to stop him.
That brute has the Index. And Miranda and Johnson.
At the conclusion of this mission, we get a long and very important cutscene where ultimately the foreshadowed betrayal of the Arbiter, just like the rest of the elites, is enacted. This starts with a lot of tension-building music and scenes even before Tartarus arrives. Miranda nearly falls and is only saved last second. Johnson hears dead silence and calling for his men that he brought with. And then, of course, the Arbiter uses his invisibility cloak to sort of sneak attack the two human characters. And then ultimately, even the Arbiter himself ends up getting surprises out of nowhere just when the Arbiter is wrapping up the conflict. Tartarus uses his hammer to grab Miranda from him, then proceeding to give what is effectively his villain speech, announcing his intent to destroy the elites and be the quote-unquote vanguard of the Great Journey, as it calls it. And his words are nothing but pure ominous against the Arbiter.
A bloody fate awaits you and the rest of your incompetent race. And I, Tartarus, chieftain of the groups, will send it. When the prophets learn of this, they will take your head when they learn. Fool. They ordered me to do it.
Symbolizing our return to Chiefside, we first start this scene from his POV as he is being wrangled by the Gravemind, then giving us several angles of the Gravemind's head and just how massive it is compared to the Chief, before showing us the Arbiter also being dragged down from above, who's now also in the Gravemind's grasp. Appropriately, the sound design for this cutscene has no music whatsoever for almost all of it, with the characters talking and some light atmos being the only things we hear. And then when the Gravemind reveals the Monitor and the Prophet that he has under his grasp, it is evident to see they must have been under his control for a while now. The Monitor is constantly in the red, agitated state, visually, if you remember from the fight against Guilty Spark in Halo 3.
To destroy this installation. Unacceptable! Unacceptable! Absolutely unacceptable! Protocol dictates action! I see now that helping you was wrong!
Meanwhile, the Prophet is so infected by the Flood that it's hard to tell where his body begins and the Gravemind form ends. After giving the two main characters in this campaign a lecture on the mechanics of Halo rings, he throws, he being the Gravemind in this case, each character into a portal, where we then get this wonderful view of the Halo ring, High Charity, and the Blue Gas Giant all together in the sky, with beams and explosions from the ships, and then the Brute Honor Guards beating down grunts in a rebellion inside High Charity, where we're able to see the violent overthrow, and rebellion has expanded well beyond the demotion of the elites and betrayal of Arbiter at this point. And then in none other than the very chamber where the prophets are giving their victory speech after getting the icon, Chief is just teleported in suddenly. I love this little moment, which just somehow justifies that after everything you went through with the Gravemind, that Chief could somehow possibly start this mission with a weapon at all. This is just a great justification for that. We end Gravemind with Tartarus and his guards slowly walking away their most important hostages onto Phantoms to attempt to activate the ring from the control room. This includes Miranda, Johnson, and Guilty Spark. Miranda takes a glance at the crashed in Amber Clad before we see a ceremony where Tartarus is receiving the sort of instruction by the prophets, which is obviously interrupted by the Flood. And then in the exchange, the Brutes win, but ultimately Truth orders them to just purposely leave Mercy behind, despite that fact that they'd won the fight, so that he can be killed by the Flood, which is clearly demonstrating that this is nothing more than a power grab for Truth. Back on the Arbiter's end, his teleport in from the Gravemind goes much more smoothly, with him transported on top of this beautiful cliff before starting the mission's gameplay. The outro cinematic for this mission is also relatively brief, with the Arbiter being confronted by what at first is an unknown wraith, only to have Artos emerge as the one driving it. They start catching up about everything that is happening as the Phantoms, Tartarus, and his Brutes are flying in start flying right overhead. We can see it is none other than Tartarus himself that gets out into the control room with all the captives in hand, shutting the door behind him. Take note of the door shutting, by the way.
Okay, now watch this. I bet you very few people are going to understand this sound effect that's supposed to happen here. What? Hear the door slam shut? Remember that door slamming shut.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Because at this point, we had decided to cut some levels at the end.
Yes.
And you flipped around some half levels.
Right.
And there were some continuity questions.
We cut back in time to Chief coming down a gravity lift in High Charity right as the phantoms of Tartarus were flying away. Even the Prophet of Mercy is there just where Truth left him. He gives just a few last words before dying when Cortana comes out of the nearby panel. And the shots here of High Charity behind Chief as he talks to Cortana just look so fantastic. Even when it turns to focus on Amber Clad, just the background in this part looks so scenic. To emphasize the need to hurry, the cutscene then wraps up with a flood-flown pelican just crashing only a few hundred feet away at most, maybe in front of Chief and Cortana, with loads of flood forms flowing out of the end of it there. And then the mission ends with Chief going through this epic green light tube thing through the key ship and only making it in the last second by scraping in before the door closes behind him. And then here we see what Cortana is seeing as the key ship flies away, leaving her behind in the flood-infected High Charity. And then, of course, we cut to the ship itself as it leaves through the portal. Back on the Arbiter's end, right after Tartarus shuts the doors to the control room.
Okay, now, meanwhile, let's hear the sound effect.
Okay.
There! That door closing sound.
What is that place?
Was that same door closing sound. See, no time has passed.
That really brings it all together.
See, now we understand that no time has actually passed.
That's
We're
right.
just picking up where we were. Jason even didn't know that.
That was your solo attempt to try to fix the way
That
we
was, Joe said, no, just put the door closing sound in again and people will realize that no time has passed. I'm like, I don't think anybody's going to get that, Joe. Sorry.
That was your idea, Joe?
Well, wait a minute. How come you're blaming that on me?
Ultimately, he decides to heed the Gravemind's warning and gets Arthas to help him break into the now locked control room. Halfway through the mission, the Arbiter will get an even bigger firepower backup in the form of Johnson here with a frickin' Scarab rather than simply a Wraith earlier. Johnson put it here better than I ever could.
Listen, you don't like me and I sure as hell don't like you.
But if we don't do something, Mr. Mohawk's gonna activate this ring. And we're all gonna die.
Tartarus has locked himself inside the control room.
Well, I just happen to have a... Come on, grab a Banshee and give me some cover. He's gonna know we're coming.
Now, with more than enough firepower and getting inside, we confront Tartarus where we get my favorite scene in the series. Not only is the dialogue fantastic, but the angles they use to contrast each side and convey each character's emotions as this group of around half a dozen major characters navigate this negotiation attempt by the Arbiter are just perfect as well. Even Johnson gets the cheesy zoom-in and one-liner that adds some comedy to this scene where effectively the Arbiter's basically trying to negotiate the peace of the galaxy with Tartarus.
Not another word.
Please. Don't shake the light bulb. If you want to keep your brain inside your head, I tell those boys to chill. Go ahead. Do your thing.
Tartarus, being far too invested in his scheme for brute dominance in the Covenant, of course, at this point, refuses all reason, and hence we get arguably the hardest legendary boss battle in the series if you don't know what you're supposed to do. If you do, it's definitely not, but if you don't know what you're doing, it can be pretty difficult. The final cutscene gives us some last-second tension as Miranda has to navigate this spinny thing without falling to her death. And even when she does that successfully, she still takes the icon out and it ends up sending a signal out of the room, which worried new players would be concerned that it may make the ring fire. Back in the key ship Chief had recently got on, and we see it on the other side of the portal, flying above none other than Earth itself. And we get to see Lord Hood for the first time in a long time as he is having a back and forth with Chief to figure out why he's on the key ship that the Prophets control, while the Covenant are attacking the space above Earth, with Chief saying the final lines of the campaign that teased at the inevitable Halo 3.
Tell me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
That's going to do it for today's episode. There's one more episode coming out, and then eventually I'll compile all these episodes into the big mega compilation for the anniversary of Halo 2, the 20th anniversary on November 9th. So yeah, the series is almost wrapped up, and I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. I've been having a lot of fun doing this project, but I'm even more excited to see how it turns out, honestly. So yeah, love you all, and have a good day.